Hello, folks, and welcome back to another set of odd and eerie winter wilderness experiences sent in by our listeners. As the winter weather continues to linger, so does the icy grip of fear and darkness cast by each unnerving experience. So lock the doors, draw the shades, grab a strong drink, and throw another log on that fire. 'Cause tonight, it's storytelling time. Story 1. My experience took place on January 5th of 2021 on Lake Vermilion in Minnesota. Now, ice fishing is supposed to be a peaceful activity, a solitary escape into nature, but that day on the lake was anything but peaceful. The lake was frozen solid under a thick layer of ice, and I'd set up my little fishing shack near the center of it, where no one else dared to venture. It was quiet, except for the occasional groan of ice shifting beneath me, a sound every fisherman knows well, but never gets used to. As dusk fell, I noticed something strange, a shadow moving under the ice beneath my feet. At first, I thought it was a big fish or maybe a trick of the dim light filtering through the ice hole. But then it moved again, slowly and deliberate, circling beneath me like a predator sizing up its prey. It wasn't shaped like any fish I'd ever seen before, but almost human-like. At that point, though, the ice beneath me splintered upward slightly, not enough to break through, but enough to make me jump out of my chair. And that's when I saw it. A face pressed against the underside of the ice right next to my fishing hole. Its eyes were wide and lifeless, its mouth frozen in a scream that sent shivers down my spine, even in the sub-zero air. Panicking, I grabbed my gear and bolted for the shore as fast as I could without slipping on the slick surface. But no matter how far I ran, that shadowy figure followed me beneath the ice, always just below my feet. By the time I reached solid ground, I could barely breathe from the fear and the exhaustion. When I looked back at the lake one last time, I saw dozens of faces staring up at me from beneath the frozen surface. Silent screams etched into their icy prison. I haven't gone ice fishing since that day. I was traumatized by my experience. Sometimes at night, though, when it's cold enough for frost to form on my windows, I swear I can see those faces staring back at me in that glass. I appreciate you sharing my story, Rusty. Thank you kindly. Cameron. Story 2. Hello, Rusty. In December of 2023, my family had rented a cabin in Fairbanks, Alaska for winter break. A cozy little place surrounded by miles of untouched snow and towering pine trees. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway from school and work. On our second night there, I decided to take my drone out for a flight before dinner. The sky was clear and the snow reflected the moonlight so brightly that it almost felt like daytime. I sent the drone up high above the treetops and started recording video footage of the landscape below. Everything looked peaceful at first. The endless white snow and dark green trees stretched out for miles, but then something strange appeared on the screen. In one corner of the frame, there was a figure standing perfectly still in an open field about a half a mile from our cabin. They were dressed all in black and seemed out of place against the snowy backdrop. Curious and slightly uneased by this sighting, I flew the drone closer to get a better look. As it approached, though, the figure suddenly turned its head upward and stared directly at the camera, as if it knew I was watching. even from high above. Then, without warning, the figure began running toward the cabin at an impossible speed. Well, that's when I panicked and I tried to steer the drone back toward me, but the screen glitched out completely before going black. After a moment though, it came back online, and when it arrived at the cabin a few moments later, the battery was completely drained despite being fully charged earlier. Well, not knowing where this figure was, and showing my family the video I had captured, we decided it would be smart to get up and get out of there. So we moved on to a spot about 50 miles down the road, and we thought we were safe there. Well, that night, we heard strange noises outside the cabin, scraping sounds against the walls and faint tapping on the windows. But every time we looked out, there was nothing there but snow-covered ground and empty woods. We left early the next morning without finishing our trip. Well, we may have stayed a little longer if it had just been the one experience, but two, not a chance in hell. Well, the feeling I had after my experience was that whatever this thing was had followed us all the way back to the new cabin and was toying with us. Well, that's the last time we'll be going out there, that's for sure. I appreciate your work, Rusty, and thank you for sharing the story. Bo Rush. Story 3. Hello, Rusty. My name is Tyler, and my experience occurred on the night of December 9th, 2024, inside the Black Hollow Forest in Vermont. Well, my friends dared me to explore the forest alone late one night, a place everyone in town avoided because of all the stories about folks going missing there over the years. So armed only with a flashlight and my phone for company, well, I set off into the woods under a sky heavy with snowy clouds. At first, everything seemed normal, just rows of bare trees stretching endlessly into darkness. But then my flashlight beam caught something unexpected, a playground in a small clearing deep within the forest. It looked ancient. The swings were rusted chains, dangling from rotting wooden beams. A merry-go-round sat lopsided on its base. Even an old slide leaned precariously to one side like it might collapse at any moment. What struck me most was how out of place it felt. No roads, no trails led there, no houses or signs of civilization anywhere nearby. Who built the place, and why had they abandoned it? Well, as I approached one of the swings, it began to move. Not gently swaying in the breeze either, but jerking violently back and forth, as though someone invisible were sitting on it and pumping their legs furiously. My breath fogged up in front of me as fear rooted me to the very spot I was standing on. Then came laughter, high-pitched and childlike, but echoing unnaturally through the clearing like it came from every direction at once. I bolted back through Black Hollow Forest as fast as my legs would carry me, tripping over roots and scraping my hands on dozens of branches along the way. When I finally made it home and told my friends what had happened, they laughed at me, of course, but none of them have ever dared to go near that forest. And that's my experience, Rusty. Just thought I'd share it with you. Thank you very much. Tyler. Story 4. Hi, Rusty. The date was January 12th of 2023. I had always loved the quiet of winter hiking. Glacier National Park was breathtaking in January, with the snow blanketing everything, and the world hushed under its weight. I was alone on the Highline Trail, something I wouldn't have dared in summer when it was crowded. But that day, it was just me in the mountains, or so I thought. About 2 hours into my hike, I noticed something odd. Up on a ridge to my left, there was a figure standing perfectly still. It was too far to make out any specific details, but it looked like a person bundled up in winter gear. I waved, but they didn't move. I shrugged it off and kept walking, but every so often I'd glance back and see them again, still up on the ridge, still very still. It started to bother me. How were they keeping pace with me? The snow was deep and untouched except for my trail. By the time I reached a clearing near Granite Park Chalet, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the snow. That's when I heard it, a soft crunching sound behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. My footprints were the only ones in the snow. I quickened my pace back toward my car, but as I descended the trail, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Fresh prints leading toward me from the opposite direction. They were huge, bigger than any human boot print I'd ever seen, and they weren't there on my way up. At this point, my adrenaline was pumping as I practically ran down the trail. When I finally reached my car at the trailhead, there was a note tucked underneath the windshield wipers. It read, quote, "You're lucky you left when you did." I froze in place after reading this, looking around, but there was nobody else in sight, and there were no other cars in the lot. I left like a bat out of hell, but my experience left me shaken. Thanks for sharing this, Rusty. I appreciate your work. Mr. Fisher. Story 5. February 5th, 2025. I had always loved winter camping. There's something peaceful about being surrounded by snow-covered trees under a starry sky. But that night in Glacier National Park was anything but peaceful. It started out when I spotted a deer watching me from the edge of my campsite just after sunset. Its eyes reflected the firelight in an unnatural way, almost too bright. And it didn't move at all. It remained there, frozen like a statue. At first, I thought it was just curious, or cautious about me being there. But as the night went on, it stayed rooted in its place, staring without blinking. Every time I glanced at it, its head seemed slightly tilted in a different direction, as if it were studying me closely. Well, around midnight, I decided to scare it off by clapping loudly and yelling. It didn't work. It didn't even flinch. When I finally crawled into my tent to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I remember it being around 2 a.m. when I woke up to soft crunching sounds outside the tent. My stomach churned when I unzipped the tent flap and saw not one but 3 deer standing just feet away from me in a perfect triangular formation. Their heads were all tilted at identical angles, their glowing eyes fixated on me like they were waiting for something. Well, I didn't want to stick around to find out what that something was. In a rush, I broke down the campsite, grabbed my gear, and bolted for my car, which was parked half a mile away through the woods. And as I drove away with shaking hands, well, my headlights caught a glimpse of them standing in the middle of the road behind me, still watching as if they knew something I didn't. Well, that's pretty much it, Rusty. I've never been freaked out by deer before until that time. I'm wondering if anybody else out there experienced this as well. It's very odd behavior, especially from a creature of the forest like this. Well, I appreciate you sharing my story. Thank you, Jamie. Story 6. As I trudged through the knee-deep snow in the frozen wilderness of Yellowstone National Park, the bare trees seemed to stretch out like skeletal fingers, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. I had been hiking for hours, my breath visible in the chilly March air, when I stumbled upon a gruesome scene that made my blood run cold. At first, I thought it was just one dead mountain lion, its fur matted with snow and its body torn to shreds. But as I looked around, I saw that there were several more, all of them similarly mutilated. I felt a shiver run down my back as I realized that whatever had killed these apex predators must have been something much larger, faster, and more aggressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched at that point. I quickly scanned my surroundings, my eyes scouring the trees for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I began to make my way back towards the trailhead, my senses on high alert, but the silence was oppressive, punctuated by only the crunch of snow beneath my boots, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking just out of sight. And then I saw it. A flash of movement, a hint of darkness. It was then I decided to raise my gun and fire a few shots into the wilderness. But whatever it was always out of sight, always lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. I fired several more shots, the sound of my gun echoing through the stillness. But it seemed to have no effect. The creature, if that's what it was, continued to stalk me, always staying out of sight. I picked up my pace, my legs pumping as I sprinted through the snow, but that feeling of being watched only intensified. Finally, I saw the lights of the visitor center in the distance, and I poured on speed, not stopping until I burst through the doors, gasping for breath. I looked back, but there was nothing, just the snow-covered trees, the frozen landscape, and an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow everything in its path. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew what I had felt, and I knew that I would never set foot in those woods again. It was one of the few times I decided to bring a firearm too, and I was pretty happy about that. Well, Rusty, I can't imagine how it would have turned out had I not had one. But thank you for sharing my experience. Ben Frieden.
And there you have it. Now, as we close this chilling chapter of Winter Wilderness Stories, let these experiences be a reminder that even in the serene beauty of a snowy landscape, darkness can take root in the most unexpected of places. Thanks for listening, and you'll hear from me soon. Good night.